Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 171 of Humanity Rising. Humanity Rising is an initiative of Ubiquity University and over 300 partnering organizations from all over the world that have come together through this extraordinary pandemic to provide an open space so that on a daily basis, Monday through Friday, people can gather to share their experiences and their solutions, their aspirations, their visions for how we can more effectively create a world beyond the current pandemic. It's been quite a journey. The world is now for 1 year been in the grip of a pandemic and a small little microbe that has challenged our world, stopped our economies, put us in lockdown, started the new social meme of social distancing in ways that were unprecedented then and still are. And it has been a unique opportunity during which the entire human race has been in the same conversation to delve very deeply into who we are and most fundamentally, who we want to become as we traverse these and other global challenges. We want to welcome you, and we want to start, as we always do, with just gathering ourselves together, taking a few deep breaths, relaxing into yourself, closing your eyes, and placing your attention on your heart. Maybe place your hand on your heart and see if you can actually listen to your heartbeat for just about a minute in a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving that you're alive. We're alive together at this critical moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. Now, with an open heart and a heart filled with gratitude for all of you that are joining with us today on Humanity Rising, I want to make a few notes as we begin to say that perhaps the most consistent theme throughout our sessions from when we started on May 22nd, in fact, it was sounded on that original session, is that the Copernican revolution of our time, of equal magnitude, is shifting from an understanding of the earth as flat to the understanding that the earth was round, and circumnavigating our sun, is the realization in our time that humanity is not separate from nature. We are one with nature. And there's nothing like a little virus from nature that stops everything we're doing to be separate from nature, to put us in lockdown, send us to our rooms, and compel us to understand that the most fundamental truth about our humanity is that we are nature. Right now, me talking with you, you listening, is nature speaking and listening to itself. And in some mysterious way beyond our understanding, nature has produced us for a purpose we have yet to discern. And at a moment of pandemic, when scientists all over the world are telling us that we are running out of time to solve global problems, we are coming to understand, certainly through Humanity Rising, is that we won't solve any of these problems until we shift the fundamental identity that we embrace. And this shift of consciousness from separation to unity brings us to the program that we're going to be having today. How does humanity, understanding it is nature, begin to align itself through its economics, its politics, its culture, with the laws of nature? And that's biomimicry. And biomimicry is the new Torah, the new Bible, the new Dhammapada. If you think back of the religious texts of humankind over the millennia, just think if we replaced all those texts with simply an awareness Gaia and allowed Gaia, Earth, laws and systems to guide us into the future. What an extraordinary future we would have. So I want to welcome my good friend and colleague, Stephanie Pace-Marshall, who I've known since the mid-1990s when we met at a conference that we had convened with Mikhail Gorbachev called the State of the World Forum. She had written a book, The Power to Transform. She was an educator out of Illinois and the Illinois Institute for Science and Math Academy. And we became very good friends. She inspired me with her book. I sent it out to probably a couple hundred people. She then began to join the various boards that I was having as we were developing a new form of education that led to Ubiquity University. And she was on that founding board until this past year when she and another colleague retired and joined our board of advisors. And so Stephanie, welcome back to Humanity Rising. She's now working with the colleagues that she'll introduce on a new book, Seed and Spark, which is about how we can align ourselves with the natural systems out of which we came. So Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you, Jim. And good morning, everyone, wherever you are. We are absolutely thrilled to be with you and to be part of Humanity Rising and the Global Commons. Jim, thank you for inviting us to be a part of this extraordinary, I don't know what the right word is, perhaps crucible, because there is so much that happens when we gather. And you have named, I think, how we all feel right now. that sharing this sense of privilege to actually be here and alive at this moment, where because of the pandemic, we are so consciously aware of our inextricable connections, our interdependence, and our need for one another. Jim, I have heard you use this phrase, highly potentiated time, many, many, many times throughout the course of Humanity Rising. And I think this is exactly where we are right now. I'm thrilled to have my two colleagues and partners in crime, I'll put that in quotes, Lee Trung, who is a renowned architect doing some of the most extraordinary applications of the principles of living systems to human construction of space, and Sam Chaltain, who has is a beautiful writer, leader in educational transformation. He's written over 6 books, served as a speechwriter to US Secretaries of Education. And together, the three of us make a very hodgepodgey group that just clicks in terms of how we see our opportunities at the moment. So, Jim, I think you mentioned this also, that this is a time of great choice. And I'll use the word existential choice, and it is going to define our future and the future of our planet. And because we have a choice, we can either ride out the pandemic, take the vaccine, sorrowfully bury our dead, and then return to normal, or we can take a very long and slow step back, wisely enter the energy field that has emerged within our connectedness and our need for belonging, and consciously shift who we have been and who we now wish to be, and become authors of a new human story, the life and the planet that we share, and a story that will be worthy of our children and their future. In Lee's and Sam's and my conversation, we saw that part of my role, I guess I'll call it today, was to metaphorically help us point the camera in a different place. And I use that as a metaphor because years ago, I heard a TED talk by a renowned photojournalist. His photos were stunning, sobering. He took us to war-torn places where you would just see pictures of human suffering from natural disaster. And he was asked a question when he was finished, and it was, what's the secret of taking a really great photograph? And his response was one that I have held as kind of a metaphor for how what I have to remind myself. He said, technique is important, but the secret is knowing where to point the camera. So it is our hope that by the end of this conversation, which is not going to be an end, by the end of today, I hope it's become clear that we are all co-authors of a new human story. And part of our commitment is that we point the camera at the places that are currently unseen, either because we actually can't see them or we are choosing not to see them, and we illuminate them because we cannot change what we cannot see. And we cannot write a new story unless we name and confront the one that we are in. I think many of you on the call today likely have read Yuval Noah Harari's book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And he comments in that book about the significance of story. And he raises 3 really important questions for our conversation today and beyond. And here's what he said, and I quote, "Humankind is facing unprecedented revolutions, and all our old stories are crumbling, and no new story has so far emerged to replace them. How can we prepare ourselves and our children for a world of such unprecedented transformations and uncertainties? What should we teach them that will help them survive and flourish in the 22nd century? What kinds of skills will they need? in order to get a job, understand what's happening around them, and navigate the maze of life? Well, I think many of his questions are our questions too. And we best not respond too quickly, lest we think we can fix what we see as broken because we have developed tools for fixing, when what is required is not fixing. What is required is reweaving what is torn, what is frayed, what is needing to be healed. Within the current story we're living, we do not have tools for that. And so we're holding, as I know you are also, that the future of humanity is going to be set in motion by the story we tell and we live about the future of learning, because mind shaping is world shaping. And whatever our mind shape, we create and become. But even though he's such a brilliant author, I believe he's not correct about one fundamental assertion. He says the old stories are crumbling, and to that we say, hallelujah. But it's not true that a new story has not arrived to replace them. There is a new story, only it's not new. It has been present all along. It has been available to us all along. And it has been inviting us to notice that we belong to the web of life, as Jim said when he introduced our panel. We are not separate, but we are part of a living whole, an ecosystem of interdependence, connections, relationships, and creativity. We are nature. We are part of life, and our purpose is yet to be discerned. In Seed and Spark, using nature as a model to reimagine how we learn and live, we wanted to illuminate this new story, grounded in the principles and dynamics of living systems and life itself. And Jim reminded us, Gaia. I've been engaged in this work, as Jim mentioned, for decades, not only studying with some of the pioneers whose research enabled science to change its mind and put in motion a new story, but also beginning with my own institution and trying to say, how is this going to work in a human system? How do I take the principles of life and translate that into human systems so that we can reimagine and redesign learning and create what we're calling generative and life-affirming systems by design? Seed and Spark is grounded in this new story of learning, but it takes it to a much broader audience. Not only how we learn, but also how we work and also how we live. I have heard sometimes when I am talking to groups, story, don't you think that's kind of soft? Story sounds like it's, really squishy and you just make it up. Don't we need to focus on a really thoughtful strategic plan? Well, yes, they're planning as part of this whole endeavor. And it's understandable that we would go back to something that holds so much artificial certitude because it's comforting. But certitude is also seductive. So I want to share an experience very quickly that may sound mystical or mysterious. It was to me. When I think about it, there are parts of it that still is, but it will give you a sense, I hope, of how long humanity has struggled and wrestled for a new story. And and the story begins in the outback of Australia when I received an invitation that came from out of the blue. And this is what it said: come and spend a week with a group of Ngankarri, the medicine men and women, spirit doctors, healers, and elder leaders of the Pitjantjatjara Aboriginal tribe. Explore the non-linearity and transparency of ancient ways of knowing and co-create a new, more sustainable human story for the new millennium. It was a terrifying invitation because of what I would have to do to go to Australia and live there for 2 weeks with Aboriginal elders. But what it enabled me to do is walk the song lines of this 80,000-year-old culture who is now inviting me as a Western leader to sit with them to see if we could co-create a new, more sustainable human story for the new millennium. We walked song lines, which are songs and maps and landscapes of how they believe their ancestors who lived beneath the ground eventually got hungry and got lonely and came up and began to walk, singing the dreams that they had told beneath the ground. Song lines, as I said, are 80,000 years old, and they are the roots of Aboriginal identity and culture. Children are born into a stanza of a song line. So we walked song lines, and at the very last night, the elder Iliatari treated us to a gift. He danced a song line. So our little group of 10 are sitting in a circle, and he is singing and dancing. Of course, we don't know what he's saying. And he concludes, and then he stops. And then within a few minutes, he starts again. And I look over at our guide, who has a PhD in culture of and lived with the Aborigines for 25 years. And she looks white. She looks totally perplexed. And the elder Iliatari begins a dance again. And when he's finished, she stood up and said to us, "Come sit in a circle. I need to tell you what just happened. The elder has changed the song line and nothing will ever be the same." Now, I just want to say that again. The elder has changed the song line, 80,000-year-old song line, and nothing will ever be the same. The song line was of the rainbow serpents, 2 males and 2 females. The females decided that they wanted to go to the lake by themselves. The males got very angry. They were extremely jealous of them. They followed them to the lake, came down underneath them, and killed them. That was the first dance he gave us. The second one was a new story of the rainbow serpents, a new song line. There were 2 males, there were 2 females. The females decided they wanted to go by themselves to the lake. The males were very sad because they loved them and missed them so much and wanted to be with them. So they surreptitiously followed them to the lake, came down underneath, and embraced them. I was invited to see if Western leaders and Aboriginal elders could together co-create a new, more sustainable human story for the new millennium. When I got home, people said to me, kind of smart alecky, "So, sweetheart, did you create a new story?" And for such a long time, I thought, no, we really didn't. And then I guess I woke up to say, oh my goodness, in the presence of Western leaders, the elder, we had co-created a new story of the rainbow serpents, from hostility and aggression and competition and anger and death, to a new story of the rainbow serpents, of love and compassion and generosity. So many people think, well, that's just a story of Aboriginal elders. It is true. However, what I hold is that perhaps something was set in motion, because a year later, the government of Australia in 1998 declared a National Day of Healing. They called it Sorry Day. Sorry Day. And then 8 years after that, the Parliament finally issued an apology to the Aborigines. And I was told now nothing would ever be the same. So I share this not because it's a mystical story, but because we never know when a new story of possibility is put into motion, a possibility that calls us to become who we are, it can go everywhere and it can go anywhere. So I came back to the Illinois Math and Science Academy. It was time for our strategic plan. And I brought my team together, and then I brought a group of students together and said, and I told them this story and said, why don't we create our strategic plan like a song line, an IMSA song line? They loved the idea, and that's what we did. And then a couple years after that, I was ready to write my book that Jim mentioned, The Power to Transform, where I took the principles of living systems, which you'll hear explicated in just a few moments, and put them within a context of a frame of a song line, a story, identity and information, a map, relationships and patterns, and a landscape of structures and processes. So going to the outback of Australia, I was able to, quote, bring back a frame that has proven to be very useful. What is the new story? What is its new map? And what is its new landscape? And with that, I will turn it over to Lee. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I think you're turning it to me.
Oh, I'm turning it to Sam. Okay.
All right. Hi, everybody. So here with you all, so many names and faces from all over the world, and to just have a chance to learn with and from you. So I think I live in DC, and I'm 2 miles from the White House. And when I was speaking with Jim a little bit before we started, he mentioned that in a lot of the recent Humanity Rising conversations, you all have been talking about what just happened here. And I want to begin by saying that I was there. I was sitting in my office, as I am now, watching the events at the Capitol unfold, as we all were. And as an ex-history teacher, I felt like this was a first draft of history moment. And I hopped on my bike knowing that if I did so in 15 minutes, I would be in the place that was showing the images on the TV screen. And I did, and I rode my bike right to the steps of the Capitol. And the reason I wanted to start with that in the context of what Stephanie just said is because, first, just to confirm the obvious, that it was horrifying. There wasn't any clear indication that there was violence, but there was clear indications of fanaticism and of a growing menace. And I suppose what is always most terrifying about fanaticism is that it was clearly a very deeply held belief. And so it was not surprising for me to then learn that a friend of mine who is still a history teacher, in the days afterwards, while he was talking about that with his high school students, had one of those students turn to him and say, "So is this the end of something or the beginning of something?" And I have yet to hear a better question for our time and for the context of what Stephanie was just talking about, because of course it's both an end and a beginning. And so what you see on your screen is literally the first page of the book. And if you haven't seen it, I mentioned, oh good, yes, lots of people are sharing links in the chat so that anybody that wants a digital copy can get it for free. But what we're hoping to do in partnership with all of you is just find new ways to contribute to and bear witness to the new world that is struggling to be born, and to the new story that, as Jim said at the very beginning, is seeking to emerge, which is, most simply put, and I quote Jim Garrison, nature speaking and listening to itself. The one thing that I will say before turning it to my partner Lee, and then really reserving as much time as possible for us to be in conversation with one another, is that we didn't set out knowing that we would end in nature. This is a copy of the table of contents, which will kind of give you a sense of what's in the book, and also provide a visual reminder of what Stephanie just talked about. So we initially set out, Lee and I, in search of the most irreducible elements of a really healthy, thriving learning environment. Like the DNA, the A, G, C, and T of the optimal conditions in which people can learn and grow. And so it seems obvious now to say that we ended in conversation with Stephanie, and that we ended in the design principles of the natural world. But I don't know that Stephanie, of course, would have known this all along. Lee and I needed to be led there and to discover it. And suffice it to say, and I'm sure this is true for all of you out there, once you track that path, there's no going back. And so the work that we do, and I hear my 7-year-old about to run upstairs, but I know everybody's okay with it. The work that we need to do now going forward is, the work that we do as a studio is we're school designers. So half of the work that we do is literal school design all around the world, and Lee will tell you some of that. But the other half of what we do is creative storytelling, is using the power of story to try to change the way people think about learning. And so in everything that we do now, I feel like our task is, along with you, right? How do we set the conditions to create the greatest likelihood that the greatest number of people can start to think and feel differently about the stories under which we live and learn, and about the work that is incumbent upon them and is possible to them in order to bring a new world into being. So you'll see, those of you that take a look, every design principle is anchored. Thank you, honey. Every design principle is anchored with an introductory essay. This is literally the opening of the chapter on identity. So why are we talking about identity? What are the lessons? And it's everything from, the extent to which mycelium provides ecologically connective tissue, to the bihemispheric nature of the brain, to the art of James Baldwin and what Baldwin has been preaching to us Americans for 50 years about the extent to which American identity is inextricably interwoven into the original sin of slavery, and it continues to shape both white and black senses of identity. And then we're trying to begin to almost build like a breadcrumb trail of wisdom of people and ideas, from Meg Wheatley to Fritjof Capra to Merlin to and artists and scientists, to try to make it impossible to ignore the ubiquity of these principles and the extent to which they are already being applied all around us, even if sometimes those applications are implicit. But of course, part of our work and part of your work is thinking about how to make those principles more explicit. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. But I want to hand it to my partner, Lee, to talk a little bit about the ways in which that effort to be more explicit has shaped how we think about physical design.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Stephanie and Sam, and sort of allowing me to have this this path a little bit. As Sam was mentioning, that I think that we were on this path of a series of questions that was very much connected to the work that we were doing. But I'm also very grateful to the many coffee conversations that I've had with Stephanie Pace-Marshall throughout my career. You know, that stretch, I would say, our relationship goes back over a decade. And in some way, I think I was trying to operationalize how to reach wisdom in a way that every time I've had coffee with Stephanie, some new insight or some new wisdom would be unfolded that literally affect the work that I was doing, or even the way that I was questioning things. And so, you know, I think about this a lot in the work that we're doing now, in the context of what's happening in the world. And in a recent conversations that I've had with one of our partner, he give definition to the distinctive difference between science and design. And certainly design is the world that I live in. But it was interesting to see from his frame in which he framed that science is about understanding the now, and design is about just creating the new story about the future that we wanted to be in, to live in. And so I think that that's really kind of brings about some of the work that we're doing that for me traces itself, or in some way weave in and out of the work that we were doing with Seed and Spark. The other seems to be such a small conversation, not small, but unexpected, I would say. There might be a good word. There was a series of workshops that we had ran with our other collaborators in Seed and Spark. And one of the collaborators is a teacher. Christy Wiley would ask us in one of these workshops, what do I do comes Monday, right? And that really kind of thinking back, I think hits a lot of us in the way that how do we present such a complex set of ideas, and what are we going to do about it on Monday? And for me, it's I think for all of us, it's not just Monday. It's like, what do we do about it now, right? And that's certainly affected the work that I've been doing with Sam at 180, and certainly kind of seeing the work that's happening around the world. And I just wanted to share a couple of stories, you know, and just be humble enough to be grateful to be a part of a series of community around the world that is trying to use design to envision and to see, as Stephanie was saying, this new story that we want to create for ourselves, and certainly for our children in the world of learning. And it's really personal for me to talk about this project in Vietnam, the Vinh Chanh campus, and connecting to the Reggio Emilia, because I left Vietnam at the end of the war, 1975, and actually haven't been back in 40-something years. And through a series of connections, was invited back to what I saw was a very different world, a different country than the one that I left, broken with decades of wars, and really kind of amplifying that idea of old story versus a new story. You know, Vietnam is about to be 100 million people, and 60-something% of Vietnamese are actually under the age of 35. So there is no old story of the war. It's only the new story of what we want to create it. And I think that when Sam talked about identity, is so much part of this project, because the essential question is, you know, what does it mean to be Vietnamese, given 4,000 years of history and arts in the context of the 21st century? So the architectural projects that we're doing there is, I think, just one frame of basically manifesting in physical form what the possibility of this new story. And even in my own backyard in Chicago, as part of this community on the southwest side of Chicago, not too far away from an old, burning coal power plant. We are creating this new campus for the Academy for Global Citizenship, in which there will be a working farm, which we're going to have 600 chickens to provide eggs, fresh eggs for all of the students and staff that are here. There will be literally an institute here that would allow other educators and teachers to come and learn about this way of learning and living in the southwest side of Chicago that is so much connected to the natural world. And even in the context of a food desert, how do we imagine teaching these young children to learn the world enough for them to take care of it? So, it tied back directly to kind of the thinking and the questioning that really follows us as we were emerging in clarity, the language and the stories in Seed and Spark. And with that, I'm gonna give it back to my partner, Sam.
Thank you, Lee. So I think the last thing that I want to say here, so that then we can have a conversation, is that in a way, and I think this will make sense to all of you, right? That the book is like a Raggedy Ann doll of people and ideas. Like, if the goal is to seed and to spark, then the physical or digital form of a book is one way to do that. And we hope that for the people that access and like that form, it's helpful. But there need to be lots of other forms. There need to be lots of other ways. And so one of the things that we're going to be doing throughout this entire year is weaving together a group of people from around the world who want to very explicitly lean into this work together, of kind of in search of the new story for humanity, one that uses nature as our guide. And I mean, obviously the new story for humanity is actually the oldest story of all. So it's really just thinking about how to elevate that. And so I'll share in a second, there's a link. If anybody is interested in participating, I mean, we've already talked with Jim about having a recurring series of conversations here as a part of Humanity Rising, and being able to tap into and learn more of the amazing things that are happening here. If people are also interested in learning more about this expedition, if you click on that link, there's a few contextual slides and also a place to kind of sign up and receive regular emails. We meet most Sundays, but we also occasionally have events throughout the week. We have an event tomorrow featuring Dr. Dan Siegel. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with his work. He's really been at the forefront of helping to articulate a working definition of mind, to the point that, Dan believes that there needs to be a new word when it comes to understanding identity, which is neither me nor we, but as he says, it's mui, that the truest definition of that oneness is that I am because you are. But Dan, of course, as a college professor of psychiatry and as really one of the founders of the nascent field of interpersonal neurobiology, has a lot to teach the rest of us about what that means and how we apply it to our lives. So knowing that, and I'm pleased to see how many of you are requesting the free digital copies of the book. While we've been talking, I've been doing my best to send those emails out. We're a small outfit, so when you submit that request, it literally goes to me and I just send it to you by email. It's super simple. So I'm going to keep trying to do that. What questions do you have? And what things should this remarkable group of 130 people talk about? knowing that what we talk about does not necessarily need to be a question that then Lee, Stephanie, or I answer, but something that all of us to differing degrees are capable of responding to. Yeah, I don't know if it's possible to, oh, here we go. There's a Q&A section. So how could these principles be applied to humans living in response to climate crisis? Stephanie, would you like to respond to that first, or would you like me to? And if you're there, Stephanie, you're on mute.
She's not responding, Sam.
So in that case, while we wait for Stephanie to return, let me respond by quoting Stephanie. So again, the question was, how could these principles be applied to humans living in response to the climate crisis? So one of the most valuable things, there she is. I'll finish my thought, Stephanie, and then you can pick up from here.
Okay, go ahead.
So one of the most valuable things I learned from Stephanie is the idea that transformation is first and foremost an inside job. So it's very easy for us to focus our gaze on the things that ostensibly exist outside of ourselves and to think about what we can do to physically impact those things that are outside of ourselves. And yet, what Adrienne Marie Brown also teaches is that how we are at the small scale is how we are at the large scale. So to some degree, I think the most important thing that each of us can do as individuals, and to some degree, the only thing that we're capable of doing as individuals against problems so vast and complex, is to be as intentional, as compassionate, and as ecologically right-sized and right-minded as possible. And to hope that in so doing, our model starts to become as infectious as possible. But Stephanie, I wonder what you would like to add.
Yeah, could you, because I was fiddling around with trying to get back online. Can you just repeat the question, Sam?
The question was, let me go back and do it exactly. How could these principles be applied to humans living in response to the climate crisis?
Oh, that's like the mother of all questions. You know, we are all, it's a wonderful question. We are all living in response to the climate crisis. I'll pick up on Sam in terms of what can we do right in front of us, because sometimes the strategic or the process or the structural needs are beyond our initial ability to change. But what is it in front of us that we can begin to create a connectedness with the world and the living systems? I'm holding that question myself in terms of younger people. I've started to talk to little people about going outside and saying, what if the tree were related? What would you want to know about them? What would you ask them? And extrapolate that. And then getting into older children. In Math and Science Academy, we had a pond. One of the kids said to me in our early years, why do we call it a pond? And I said, well, what would you like to call it? Well, let's call it a biological research pond, because then we'll go into it and learn what's inside. Okay. So I'm really not answering your question. It's creating a sensibility that we are inextricably connected to the planet when we are so far, everything about us is so far removed. It's telling stories of connectedness. It's putting children in nature where there is a connectedness and they begin to establish a relationship. It's helping them plant. It's helping them. The Academy for Global Leadership is just a quintessential example of how we're developing capacity, or how they are developing capacity to see the natural world as so connected to who they are.
And
So
Stephanie, if I can,
Yeah.
I think that AGC is a good example, and it relates to another question that was asked. I think it was by Catherine. Hi, Catherine. I was struck by, this is what Catherine writes. I was struck by your question, how do we teach children enough about the earth for them to care of it? With so many living in cities, how do we foster a love of nature they do not see? So, such an important question. And literally the last story in the book is about a public school in Chicago called the Academy for Global Citizenship. And the reason I want to just briefly highlight it is because, first of all, it's a beautiful model. The idea is the primary focus of their curriculum is love of self, love of others, love of nature. But they're in an industrial section of the city. And as a school that's only 10 years old, first they were in like a converted dentist's office, and now they're in a converted barrel factory. So they've done what they can to transform the concrete parking lot into, to collect rainwater and solar turbines. But there are, and they have chickens, but there are limits to what you can do. And yet now what AGC has done is it was able to get state funding to purchase a 6-acre plot of land right in the city that has been abandoned, and are going to build a school of the future for all of us that, as Lee referenced earlier, is modeled to be a truly living school. So not only net positive, not only a working farm, but, and this is the key feature, all being designed on the same dollar for dollar expenditure that any other school in the Chicago public schools would have to abide by. So it isn't some amazing fantasy school that's only possible because they got money from a rich prince. This is literally a design that any school and unfortunately, any school with a public school budget is going to have a threadbare budget, can accomplish. But there's so much more to that story. So I really urge you all to, obviously we believe that all of the stories in Seed and Spark are important and illustrative, but every chapter and every principle ends with a story that is grounded in a school community, so that we can see through them the ways in which these principles take their most practical application in the world. I just want to briefly outline what Anita just said. One small step is to create raised garden beds around buildings and parking lots and teach others to grow and nurture a garden. Build the garden beds into the building plans. Yes. And Lee, do you want to put up again the sketch of AGC so that people can see it? That is something that a lot of schools are doing here in DC, and you'll see here. And Lee, I don't know if there's something in, really I should let you speak to this visual, maybe go through both and just kind of give people a sense of what's going on.
Yeah, so Sam mentioned, we're literally in the southwest side of Chicago. We're right down the street from the airport, which is very much in kind of a going through somewhat of a renaissance to previously an industrial area. The current state is it's still lacking, a grocery store. So it's in the midst of the food desert. I was just on a board meeting last night where, AGC being a Latino community is being hit really hard with COVID, right? As we're about to emerge out of the virtual learning and going to the hybrid system, which in a few weeks. So this community experience a lot of the conditions when we talk about underserved communities. And yet, I think that from the very beginning, the founder of the school, she's frustrated with just the inequity of education, and yet knowing that even if she built, 1,000 AGCs, it still is not going to meet the needs. And so the idea is just to create a model that's in the shape of this, that could be a catalyst in which other communities could learn from and create their own, right? So I think that's really important, and that's one of the reasons why the budget of this campus has to somehow parallel the same cost of construction for any Chicago public school in the city. That was really important. But we know that if we make the right decisions, one of the goals is that this campus will meet the Living Building Challenge, one of the highest sustainable standards that's out there right now when it comes to construction. It will be net positive. It will have a way to manage the water. It will have a way to really utilize this working urban farm to really put into practice the farm to table concept. And it will have a health clinic. It's going to have a Reggio approach early childhood program. That's one of the things that we're working on right now. But really essentially is that we just want to create kind of the next generations of ambassadors. Imagine if we have millions of Greta Thunberg out there fighting for the planet. That's really is the essential goal of this particular, I would say, we don't call it a school, just like Stephanie doesn't call the Illinois Math and Science Academy a school, but really a living community that is, creating a condition where they can support and help each other thrive. One of the things that we focus on, to create the new stories that you can see, this is the two floor plans to the building. We don't have repetitive, factory model classrooms. The learning environment is structured in such a way and designed intentionally to be villages. We don't have, subject-based learning spaces. We have human conditions, intimacy of scale and intentions in a way that we want to create these learning spaces. So everything that we do is really contributing to potentially a new story about this community.
I also just want to say, and I'm mindful of time. I know we're at the top of the hour, although Jim, I forget how much time we have, so I just want to be sensitive to that. But it's so
another 15, 20 minutes.
Okay. It's so exciting to be having this conversation with you all, first of all, and it's like classic sensory overload in a good way, in the sense that I'm trying to read the chat, respond to the chat, respond to your emails so that I can get this copy. So I'm just putting Lee's and my emails, and Stephanie, if you want to drop yours into the chat, so that if for any reason any of this stuff gets lost by me, you know how to get in touch with us. And this, I'm now adding again based on Kat's question, or Kala's question. That's a link where you can learn more about the project. You know, Stephanie, I would love to hear you speak a little bit more. You started to, but even though I understand that we're not only a global group, but a group that includes and transcends people who work in education. But as a career educator, when you think about the work of adults with young people, what feels like the most important things to convey to 130 adults so that we can be even better, whether we're teachers or fathers or mothers or aunts and uncles, in the way that we interact with children?
That's a fabulous question. So when I started thinking about writing The Power to Transform, the question I held is, what will it take to create a generative and life-affirming system of learning and schooling that liberates the goodness and genius of every child and ignites and nurtures the power and creativity of the human spirit for the world? I didn't say how, because I don't think we know how. And I think when you ask the how question, it locks off any sense of possibility, spaciousness, or promise. It just restricts you to a strategy or a process. So if we want to liberate the goodness and genius within every child, I can't tell you how initially depressing it was to hear people say, "Do you really believe that? Do you?" And I would say, I was like a deer in headlights. Do I really believe what? That within each child there is goodness and genius? So, to respond to this question, not answer it, because I don't use the word answer anymore. I use the word respond, because answer means you know it and you got it right. Respond means, this is my current thinking, is I assume many of you are familiar with the concept of a horse whisperer. I've spent a fair amount of time, I'm not a horse person, but I have a friend who really is. And I wanted to unpack this concept and use it as a metaphor for becoming a child whisperer. So I called my friend the horse whisperer and said, "Tell me what a horse whisperer does." Well, they don't bully, they don't punish, they don't cajole, they don't exercise control over the animal. They get to know this animal. They get to listen. They begin to discern. They begin to connect. They begin to see that if they do X, the animal will do whatever it is. So I translated horse whisperer into child whisperer. And I was blessed to have a mother who was one. And so when I went in to observe her teach autistic schizophrenic children, I was greeted by at the door with comments of her colleagues, "So you have come to see the miracle worker." I didn't know they meant my mother until I watched her. And there was this one particular child, and I haven't forgotten the question, who was, he's just moving all over the place. And my mother just sat in front of him, put her hands on his face, started very, very, very gently rubbing his face, talking very quietly, and keeping total eye contact. And I watched this child go from hyperactivity to total focus on her and then respond. He came to life. He came back to life. And when I was 21 and I saw that, I said, okay, that's what I want to be. I want to bring children alive. So my response to your question is, first of all, you have to believe that within every child, there is inherent goodness and genius. If you don't believe that, you got to work on that first. And then our challenge is, what will it take to bring it to life by design and intention? Because what might bring Sam's genius alive may not bring mine. So we have to be very adaptive to each child. I wouldn't call that you can call it personalized learning, but it's so much deeper. We have to understand the gifts that we have when we are able to work with children and create conditions with intention that will allow them to leave school knowing exactly what their gifts are and exactly what they're good at, instead of leaving school knowing exactly what they can't do and exactly what they're not good at. So shifting the story of learning to focus on the child and creating the conditions that we know we can, because we have the research, whether it's from Dan Siegel or others, we know what we need to do. We have to totally reimagine and redesign. That's why I use the word generative and life affirming. Everyone needs to become a child whisperer.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's there's so much wisdom in that, and in particular, the idea of moving away from how questions and thinking about responses instead of answers. Really powerful. And I know we're almost out of time, Lee, but you know, one of the things that I feel like I've learned from you, which I think relates to this conversation, is you know, the way Lee talks about design, he doesn't even talk about human-centered environments. He talks about humanity-centered environments. And I think for a group that is together on day 171 of Humanity Rising, would you just tell us a little more what you mean? Like, how do you design a humanity-centered environment? And maybe I'm curious to what extent your answer to that question has changed or deepened as a result of this project.
Well, I'm going to take after Stephanie. I don't have an answer. I have a response. So and the responses come at that differently, right? And some are negative responses, much as some hopeful response. But what does it mean? What does it mean to have humanity center, like front and center? And for me, it's to identify things that you are bothered by, as much as things that brings about such beauty that it stays with you. Every year, Architectural Magazine would always list, 10 highest high-rise in the world. There's like this enormous competition to build the next tallest building. And I always have a totally negative response to that, right? It's almost inhumane in a way that we think about, the whole planet, that there is this race to constantly build the next highest tower. So that, I would say that maybe one way is to stop doing that. That's one way to be more human-centered, is to stop doing some of the things that we know it's quite harmful and counterproductive to us, thinking that we are part of nature, not separate from it. The hopeful response is that question stays with us in anything that we do going forward. Interestingly enough, well, not interestingly enough, but the challenge for me as an architect is to go beyond sustainable, to go toward regenerative, is to stop building, right? I mean, how do I mean, that's going to stay with me, but I think that is a path that we have to really contemplate and embrace in a way that we think about, what is the next versions of human-centered environment, cities, spaces, sense of place that we need to reimagine, we need to rethink, we need to stop. So I'm not sure if it's a clear response to your question, Sam, but that's what I'm bothered by, and I do see lots of hopeful stuff that's happening in the world relative to addressing that particular question as well.
So with the caveat that it's the first, or not even the first, but just the latest in our kind of unfolding conversation and chance to weave ourselves together. And with a reminder that if people are interested in learning more about this project and connecting to us, I'll put the URL again at the bottom. There's all of the links and all the information, including getting a free copy of the book. There is a physical copy too, and it is wonderful to hold, and it's beautiful, but because it is so colorful, and because we're self-publishing this ourselves, there's no way that we can avoid it costing $45. So I wish we could do something about that, but anybody can have it for free digitally if they want it that way. So please reach out to us. I'm gonna save this chat because I see lots of people sharing resources, and at least many of the ones that I saw I'm not yet aware of. And that's part of what's so exciting about this, is continuing to find new people and new networks and new relationships and new ways of going deeper. So I'm definitely gonna follow up on all of those ideas. And Jim, over to you. Yes.
May I make one comment, because I did want to let people know about what today represented. I'm a member of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and you may all know about the Doomsday Clock. It was not recent. It had been at 100 seconds to midnight. The Doomsday Clock was created in 1947, right after the bombing of or the first use of the atomic weapons. And it has been set using the metaphor of midnight, which is the apocalypse when the world will end. The furthest away from midnight has been 17 minutes. The closest has been 2 minutes or 100 seconds. And that's where it is now. And it was that way last year. They did not move it today. They left it here. But it comes from, there are 3 factors, and I'm sharing all this not to end on a doom and gloom note, but it is part of the context in which we reside. Nuclear proliferation, nuclear weapons, climate change, and then what they call a threat multiplier of cyber-enabled information warfare that undercuts our ability to respond to international security issues. And this aggregation of these 3 threats are put into the clock with this astonishing panel of Nobel laureates and scientists, et cetera. But the thing that I think is so important for us to hold as we talk about a new story is the reason we are at this place is because the international political infrastructure for managing what we do have that could mitigate against these threats is being completely eroded and undermined. They are decisions. We are in this place because of decisions that human beings are making not to pay attention. So if ever there is a time for us to commit and recommit to telling and living a new national story, a new global story for humanity, it really is now.
Thank you, Stephanie. Very important note upon which to close this very elegant and I would say exuberant discussion about how we engage in the kinds of biomimicry necessary for our own survival. We've been highlighting the nuclear issue fairly often on Humanity Rising and of course the climate change issue. And that third threat that you speak of, you know, came close to undermining democracy in the United States.
Right.
And we've gone through a strategically orchestrated attempt by Vladimir Putin using his henchman in the Oval Office of the White House, Donald Trump, for the last 4 years to break apart the alliance systems as imperfect as they have been that were securing the peace. And it was very comforting to know that Joe Biden, in one of his first acts as president, was to secure the restart treaty with the Russians for another 5 years that Trump was trying to eliminate. And we also, let's see, on the 22nd of January, we celebrated the going into force of the UN treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons, the first treaty in history that actually called for the complete elimination of nuclear weapons. So we're on the last minute and a half of available time to solve these problems, which is one of the reasons why Humanity Rising, and I know you folks wrote that book, it's all hands on deck time. And we need to, all of us, understand that every choice we make now matters. From what you eat to what you wear to the products you buy to how you orient yourself to other human beings, how you build communities of coherence. Every choice now matters in a world in which we have a diminishing time frame to sort ourselves out. And that's why, of course, a change, a fundamental Copernican revolution, at the heart of which is biomimicry, needs to be embraced by us all. So I really want to thank the three of you and look forward to, you know, just scheduling another session down the trail where we can have a deeper dive into these very important matters. Then tomorrow, everyone, we're going to continue this discussion, and we're going to be looking at impact investing in rural development as an instrument in developing the regeneration of our biodiversity. And this is worth noting in closing. What Stephanie was laying out means fundamentally that there's no more time left for sustainability. You can't be sustainable with an ecosystem that is impaired, if not destroyed. The only option left for humanity on planet Earth is regeneration. We need to regenerate humanity, first of all, and build community. We need to regenerate our identities of who we are as not separate from nature, but one with nature. Then we all have to come together and regenerate nature itself in a new relationship. So tomorrow we're going to explore more deeply the whole notion of regeneration as it pertains to impact investing in our rural areas around the world. So thank you, everyone. Stephanie, Sam, Lee, wonderful session. And we look forward to having you back. And we'll see everybody same time, same station, 5 p.m. Central European Time tomorrow on Humanity Rising.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Great session.
Thanks.